Malik's phone wouldn't stop vibrating against his thigh, the buzz traveling through the denim like a warning he didn't have time to read. He kept his hands where they could be seen anyway.
Palms open. Fingers spread.
Like he'd practiced 100 times in mirrors and 100 more times in his head. The Starbucks cup in his other hand had gone cold, the lid smeared with a thumbprint. He'd bought it out of habit on the drive over, like caffeine could make this part easier. The part where you show up to your own property and still have to explain yourself to somebody else. "Sir," the officer said, voice clipped like a door shutting.
"Step away from the fence."
Malik stood on the wrong side of his own chain link, keys dangling from one finger. Behind him, the small ranch house sat quiet under a gray Maryland sky, the yard half wild from 2 seasons of him not being here enough.
The shed door slightly crooked.
A blue tarp flapped against a stack of old lumber. It looked like what it was, a place someone used to live and someone still owned, but no one had had the energy to keep perfect. "I'm not doing anything," Malik said, steady as he could make it. "I'm unlocking it." The second officer's gaze ran over Malik's hoodie, his work boots, the stubble he hadn't shaved because he'd been up too late with his mother on the phone again. It wasn't an obvious stare, not the cartoon version people like to argue about. It was the quick math people did in their heads, the quiet decision that landed heavy anyway. "Neighbor called it in," the first officer said. "Said there's a man hopping fences." "I didn't hop anything." Malik swallowed, hearing how tight his voice sounded.
"I own the place."
The first officer's expression didn't move. "Do you have ID?" Malik nodded once, slow. His wallet was in his back pocket, right where it always was. He glanced down at the badge in his other pocket without letting his head turn too much. He could feel it there, the shape he wasn't supposed to lead with, the one he rarely flashed because he hated what it did to the room. He hated that it might be the only thing that would make them believe him. "Okay," Malik said. "I'm going to reach for my wallet." The first officer's eyes sharpened. "With your left hand." Malik moved like his joints were made of glass. He set the cold coffee carefully on the top rail of the fence, then slid his left hand back, 2 fingers pinching the wallet out like it might bite. The air felt too thin. Somewhere down the street, somebody's dog barked, and a car stereo thumped bass like the world was doing normal things without them. Malik held the wallet out, and the officer took it without touching his fingers, like Malik was contagious.
Malik Harris, de Officer Reed.
"This address isn't on here." "It's my secondary," Malik said.
"It's my mother's old place. I'm fixing it up."
The officer looked up. "Why?" "Because life doesn't stop needing you just because you're tired," Malik thought. Because his mother had begged him not to sell it when she moved in with his aunt. Because he'd said he'd take care of it, like saying it made it true. Out loud he just said, "Because it needs fixing." The second officer walked toward the front porch, eyes scanning the windows, the steps, the old planter that still held dead stems from last year. Malik could see the exact moment the officer decided the house didn't look like it belonged to someone like him. Not in the way people said it. Just in that quiet, practiced way people told themselves stories. "Sir," the first officer said again. "Do you have proof you own the property?" Malik let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "The deed's in my car. The registration's in my glove box. The keys are in my hand." "Keys don't prove ownership," the officer said. Malik almost laughed, but it would have come out wrong. Bitter. Angry. Like a trap. He looked past them, down the block, and saw a woman standing in her doorway with her phone up, filming. Maybe she was the one who called. Maybe she wasn't. Malik didn't know her. That was part of the problem. The neighborhood had changed while he was busy surviving his own life. "Okay," Malik said.
"Tell me what you need, me todo."
The officer's eyes held him for a beat too long.
"Stay right there."
As the officer spoke into his radio, Malik kept his face neutral and tried not to let the familiar heat climb into his chest. He'd taught himself years ago how to swallow feelings whole. At Quantico. In field offices. In meeting rooms where everyone smiled while they measured you. But this wasn't a briefing room. This was a street where he'd ridden his bike as a kid, where his mother used to sit on the porch with a glass of iced tea and wave at neighbors. He could still picture her there. In his mind she looked healthier than she'd sounded last night, her voice thin with worry as she asked him if he was eating real meals and not just those little bars. He'd promised he was fine. Like always.
A car doors chat somewhere.
Malik's phone buzzed again. He didn't look. He didn't want to see his boss's name or his sister's name or the unknown number he'd been ignoring for 2 days because he didn't have space for more problems. He watched the first officer's jaw tighten as he listened to the radio, then his eyes landed on Malik again. "You said your name is Malik Harris," the officer repeated, like the radio had spoken a different language. "That's what my ID says." The officer gave the smallest nod, the kind that meant nothing. "Any reason you're here today specifically?" Malik stared at the front door of the house and felt the weight of his own answer press down on him. "Because my mother is getting older and she wants a place that still feels like hers. Because I'm stretched thin and I keep thinking if I fix this one thing, maybe I'll feel like I'm not failing at everything else. Because my marriage ended in a quiet way, like a candle going out, and I needed something to do with my hands. Because last weekend, his ex-wife Rachel had texted him a photo of a box in the garage labeled Mom's House Stuff, and underneath it she'd typed, "Please come get this."
I can't keep holding everything.
Malik had stared at the message for a long time. Then he'd replied, "I'll handle it this week." He'd meant it. He did. He did handle things. That was who he was. "I'm doing repairs," Malik said. "I work nights sometimes. Today, I'm off." The second officer came back from the porch.
Front doors locked.
"Windows are intact." Malik almost said, "Of course they are. I locked them." But he didn't. He didn't want to sound like he was correcting anyone. He hated that he had to manage his tone like it was another piece of evidence. The first officer handed the wallet back, but he didn't relax.
"Where is your vehicle?"
"Right there," Malik said, nodding toward the black SUV at the curb. It wasn't flashy. It was practical. A little dusty from too many miles and not enough weekends. Malik had picked it because it didn't draw attention. Nothing about him was supposed to draw attention. Not his job. Not his life. Not his name on a mailbox. "Okay," the officer said. "We're going to verify."
Slowly walk to the car, hands visible.
Malik's throat tightened. "To get the paperwork." "That's what you said." Malik took one slow step, then another. He could feel the eyes on him, officers, neighbors, somebody behind a curtain. Each step felt like permission he didn't want to ask for. When he reached the SUV, he paused with both hands hovering near the door. "May I open it?" he asked, and hated the way it sounded. "Go ahead," the officer said. Malik opened the driver's door with 2 fingers, then leaned in carefully, retrieving the folder from the center console where he'd put it earlier that morning. He'd come prepared because some part of him always expected this. Not specifically this moment, not this street, but the general rule, always be ready to prove you belong. He turned and held the folder out. The officer flipped through, eyes scanning. Malik watched the officer's face for the shift, the moment it would soften or harden. He watched the second officer's shoulders, the set of his stance, the readiness that never fully turned off. The first officer's gaze dropped to the line that mattered, then rose again. "This says the owner is Malik Harris," the officer said. "Yes," Malik replied. The officer looked at the house again, then back at Malik, like he was trying to fit 2 pictures together that didn't match in his head.
A sound came out of the radio, static, then a voice.
The first officer listened, his expression changing in a way Malik recognized instantly, not from the street but from work. It was the look of someone realizing the room is bigger than they thought. The officer's hand paused near the radio. "Dispatch, repeat that." Malik's phone buzzed again, and this time the screen lit up enough that he could see the name without moving it. "Special Agent in Charge, D.C." Malik's stomach dropped, not because he was afraid of his boss, but because he knew what that timing meant. He knew his life well enough to recognize when two separate storms were about to collide. The officer's gaze flicked toward Malik's glowing screen, then back to Malik's face. "You expecting a call?" the officer asked. Malik stared at the name on his phone and felt the familiar split inside him. Two versions of himself pulling in opposite directions.
The private man who just wanted to fix a broken house and breathe for a minute.
The other man, the one with a badge in his pocket, the one who carried secrets and rules and weight, even when he was standing on his own lawn. "No," Malik said quietly, "because the truth was messy. But I have to take it." The first officer's radio crackled again, and whatever dispatch said this time made the officer's posture change. Less sure. More careful. Malik didn't move. He didn't reach for the badge. He didn't want power. He wanted to be treated like a person before anything else. But the cold fact sat in his chest like a stone. They didn't know who he was. And in a way, neither did half the people in his life anymore. He lifted the phone slowly, eyes on the officer. "I'm going to answer." The officer nodded, tight-lipped. Malik put the phone to his ear, and before he could speak, his boss's voice came through, low and urgent. "Harris," the special agent in charge said.
"Where are you right now?"
Malik looked at the small house, the imperfect yard, the officers still watching him like he was a question they couldn't solve. "I'm at my property," Malik said. "Why?" There was a beat of silence, then his boss said, "Listen carefully.
I need you calm.
And I need you to tell me if local law enforcement is with you." Malik's mouth went dry. He could hear the officers' radios, the distant dog, the faint hum of traffic. The whole world sounded normal, which almost made it worse. He swallowed. "Yeah," he said. "They're here." Another pause, and then his boss's voice turned even quieter. "Okay," the SAC said. "Do not escalate anything. But you need to identify yourself the right way. Now." Malik's fingers tightened around the phone, and his eyes lifted to the officer's face, searching for anything human there, anything that said he was more than a suspicion. The officer waited, watching him, not hostile, not kind, just certain of his authority. Malik took a breath that felt like it scraped his ribs. Because in real life, the hardest part isn't being strong. It's deciding when you're allowed to stop being polite. That choice surprised even him. The special agent in charge stayed quiet on the line, letting Malik breathe, letting him decide how he wanted to step into the moment. Malik appreciated that more than he could explain. Respect didn't always show up as words. Sometimes it showed up as silence. He lowered the phone slightly and looked at the two officers again. They stood the same way they had before, but something subtle had shifted. Not fear. Not apology.
Just uncertainty.
The kind that crept in when the story in your head started to wobble. "I work for the federal government," Malik said calmly. He kept his voice even, the way he did in interviews. "My supervisor is on the phone right now." The first officer's eyebrows lifted just enough to register surprise. "Okay," he said. "What agency?"
Malik Escalate.
This was the moment he usually hated. The moment when the room changed not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. "FBI," Malik said.
The word landed quietly.
No dramatic reaction.
No sudden apologies.
Just a pause that stretched long enough to feel heavy. The second officer shifted his weight. "You have credentials?" Malik nodded. He reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out the leather wallet that held his badge. He opened it without flourish, holding it at chest height, not shoving it forward, not hiding it either. The first officer leaned in just enough to see, then leaned back. His shoulders dropped a fraction. Not relief. More like recalibration. "All right," the officer said. "Thank you for clarifying." Malik didn't respond right away. He watched the woman across the street lower her phone, her face unreadable. He wondered what story she'd already told herself. He wondered if this moment would change it, or if she'd just find a new version that felt safer to believe. "I didn't clarify earlier because I didn't think I needed to," Malik said. His tone wasn't sharp. It wasn't accusing. It was tired. "I'm just trying to fix my mom's house." The words surprised him with how honest they sounded. The first officer nodded once. "Understood. We got a call. We responded." "I know," Malik said. "That's your job." There was another pause, less tense this time. The kind that comes after the worst has already happened and everyone's just figuring out how to stand again. The officer handed Malik's folder back.
"Everything checks out."
"We'll clear the call." Malik nodded. He didn't smile. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. The interaction didn't feel like something that required gratitude. As the officers walked back to their cruiser, Malik felt the adrenaline finally start to drain from his body.
His hands shook just a little.
He noticed it and tucked them into his pockets, embarrassed by a reaction he couldn't control. His phone buzzed again. His boss. "You okay?" the SAC asked. "Yeah," Malik said. "I'm fine."
"You want me to call the local department, smooth things over?"
Malik thought about it. He pictured a phone call, a title being mentioned, someone higher up stepping in to put a bow on something that didn't feel wrapped. "No," Malik said finally. "Let it be what it was." There was a beat, then a quiet, approving hum on the other end. "All right."
Calme later. When Malik hung up, the street felt strangely empty. The patrol car drove off.
The woman across the street disappeared back inside. The dog stopped barking. Life moved on like nothing had happened. Malik stood there for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the front door of the house. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, taller than he felt, older than he remembered, eyes carrying more than he liked to admit. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house smelled like dust and old wood and faint lavender from a plug his mother had probably forgotten to unplug years ago. Sunlight slanted through the front window, catching on floating particles, turning them into tiny sparks. Malik set his keys on the counter and leaned forward, resting his hands there, letting his head drop. His chest tightened, not from fear now, but from something quieter.
Exhaustion.
He'd spent so much of his life proving himself in rooms that didn't look like this. Secure buildings. Conference rooms. Places where his badge meant access, where his voice carried weight. Out here, on his own property, none of that had mattered.
A knock came from the open front door.
Malik stiffened instinctively, then turned. A woman stood on the porch. Mid-40s, maybe. Jeans, a gray hoodie, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She held a small potted plant in both hands like she wasn't sure what else to do with them. "Hey," she said, tentative.
"Sorry to bother you."
Malik stepped closer but didn't close the door. "Hi. I'm Denise.
I live 2 houses down."
She hesitated. "I just wanted to say. I didn't call the police. But I saw them. And I figured you might need. I don't know."
"A welcome, I guess."
She lifted the plant slightly, embarrassed.
Malik blinked.
He hadn't expected that. He'd been bracing himself for awkward silence, for people pretending nothing had happened. "That's nice of you," he said honestly. She shrugged. "My husband passed last year. I remember what it felt like when the neighborhood went quiet on me. Thought maybe I'd try something different. Malik felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you, he said, stepping onto the porch. I'm Malik. Denise, she repeated, smiling faintly.
Your mom said to live here, right?
Malik nodded.
Yeah. I'm fixing it up.
Well, Denise said, glancing at the yard. If you need help or tools, or just someone to complain to about weeds, I'm around. Malik took the plant. It was simple.
Green. Alive.
I appreciate that, he said. As Denise walked back down the steps, Malik stood there holding the pot, feeling the strange weight of it in his hands. It wasn't a miracle. It didn't erase what had happened. But it was something real.
Something human.
And for the first time that day, Malik felt like he could breathe without counting his breaths. That night, Malik stayed longer than he planned. The sun slipped down slow, the light fading from yellow to gray, then to that dull blue that made everything feel unfinished. He worked without music, without podcasts, just the scrape of a putty knife against old paint and the quiet creak of the house settling around him. The plant Denise had given him sat on the windowsill, catching the last light. He kept glancing at it like it might say something. His phone lay face down on the counter. He didn't want to see the notifications stacking up. Work emails. A text from his sister asking how the house looked. Maybe another message from Rachel that he wouldn't answer right away because every reply felt like reopening something he'd already tried to close. Malik sanded a patch of the wall that didn't really need sanding. He just needed to keep his hands busy. The truth pressed in when he stopped moving. He leaned back against the counter and let his head rest against the cabinet, eyes closed. The quiet felt heavier than the confrontation earlier. Back then, adrenaline had carried him. Now there was nothing to hold him up but himself. He thought about the officers' faces when they realized who he was. Not guilt. Not shame.
Just adjustment.
Like switching channels. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He'd spent years believing that if he did everything right, education, discipline, patience, he'd earn a kind of safety. Not privilege. Just space. The right to exist without being questioned. But standing on his own lawn, keys in his hand, he'd felt the same old tension coil in his chest. The same calculation. How slow to move.
How calm to sound.
How to make other people comfortable enough not to make things worse. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling, following a faint crack that ran from one corner toward the light fixture. I'm tired, he said out loud. The words echoed softly, like the house was listening. Malik thought about his mother, how she used to sit at the kitchen table late at night, bills spread out, glasses sliding down her nose. He remembered being a teenager, asking her why she didn't sleep more, why she always looked so tense. She'd smiled then, tired but gentle. Because somebody has to hold things together. When had that become his job too? His phone buzzed against the counter, startling him. He picked it up before he could think better of it. Rachel. He hesitated, then answered. Hey, she said. Her voice sounded careful, like she was walking on ice. Hey. I saw your car was gone, she said. I figured you went to the house. Yeah, Malik said. I'm here. There was a pause. Are you okay? He almost said yes.
The automatic answer.
The one he gave everyone. But the day had scraped him raw. I don't know, he said instead.
Rachel exhaled slowly.
That bad. Malik looked around the empty kitchen, the half-painted walls, the plant on the sill. I just keep thinking I should be stronger than this. Rachel was quiet for a moment. You've always been strong, she said. That's kind of the problem. The words landed heavier than he expected. I don't know how to turn it off, Malik admitted.
At work, at home.
I'm always on. Always managing something. That's why I left, Rachel said softly. Malik closed his eyes. I didn't want to be another thing you had to handle, she continued. I wanted you to sit with me sometimes.
Toby tailleur with.
The silence between them stretched. Not angry. Just honest. I didn't know how, Malik said. I know, Rachel replied. That doesn't make it hurt less. Malik swallowed.
The house felt suddenly too small.
After they hung up, he stood there longer, phone still in his hand. The truth settled in slowly, like dust after something collapses. He hadn't lost his marriage because he didn't care. He'd lost it because he never let himself stop carrying everything alone. Malik stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, damp with the promise of rain.
Streetlights flicked on, casting soft halos on the pavement.
Somewhere down the block, a TV played faint laughter through an open window. Normal life. He sat on the front steps and let his elbows rest on his knees. His shoulders slumped forward, posture breaking in a way he rarely allowed. He thought about the badge in his pocket. About the respect it commanded. About how quickly it could change a room. And he thought about how useless it had been earlier, when he just wanted to unlock a door. The realization hit him quietly but firmly. He'd been chasing validation from systems that would never fully see him. He'd let that chase shape how he moved through the world, how he loved, how he rested. He pressed his palms together, fingers interlaced, and stared at them. Hands that had held evidence bags and steering wheels and his mother's trembling fingers in hospital rooms. Hands that didn't know how to let go.
A light flicked on 2 houses down.
Denise stepped onto her porch, wrapped in a cardigan, holding a mug. She noticed Malik and gave a small wave. Not intrusive. Not pitying. Just there. Malik lifted a hand in return. He didn't go over. He didn't need to.
The connection existed anyway.
For the first time in a long while, Malik let himself sit with the discomfort instead of fixing it. He didn't check his phone. He didn't plan the next task. He just stayed. And in that stillness, something inside him cracked. Not in a way that broke him, but in a way that finally let air in. He wasn't weak for feeling worn down. He was human. Malik came back the next morning with a different pace. The house looked the same as it had the night before. Same chipped paint.
Same uneven yard.
Same quiet street waking up slowly as commuters pulled out of driveways and joggers passed with earbuds in. But Malik felt different inside it. He set his coffee down on the counter and didn't rush to pick up a tool. Instead, he stood in the kitchen and listened. The refrigerator hummed. A floorboard creaked when he shifted his weight. The house wasn't asking to be fixed all at once. It was just there, waiting. He opened the windows, letting fresh air push out the stale smell of dust. The plant from Denise caught a bit of sunlight and leaned toward it, simple and stubborn. Malik smiled at that without realizing he was doing it. He worked for a few hours, steady but unhurried. He cleaned instead of renovating. Threw away old papers his mother had kept, just in case. Set aside a box of photos he couldn't bring himself to touch yet. Around noon, his phone buzzed. "Mom." He answered immediately. "How's the house?" she asked. "It's okay," Malik said. "It's still standing."
She laughed softly.
"That's something." They talked about small things. The weather. A neighbor who'd brought her soup. A doctor's appointment coming up next week. Malik didn't try to solve anything. He didn't offer plans or timelines. He just listened. When they hung up, he realized his shoulders weren't tight. Later that afternoon, Denise wandered over with a pair of work gloves dangling from her hand. "Thought you might need these," she said. "And I made too much pasta salad." Malik accepted both. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. But I wanted to. They sat on the porch steps and ate out of mismatched containers. They talked about nothing important. Her job at the library. Malik's commute. How strange it felt to live in a place long enough to recognize people by their routines. At one point, Denise glanced at the house. You know, she said, you don't have to make it perfect. Malik nodded. I'm starting to get that. That evening, he drove home instead of staying late. He stopped by a grocery store and bought actual food. Not protein bars.
Not takautiten standing up.
At home, he cooked for himself and ate at the table. He left his phone in the other room. The next week didn't magically improve. Work was still heavy. The job still demanded parts of him he couldn't always afford to give. The world didn't suddenly become gentler or fairer. But Malik started doing one small thing differently. When his body said it was tired, he listened. When his sister called, he didn't rush the conversation. When Rachel texted him later that week asking if he'd gotten the rest of his things, he replied honestly.
Not defensive.
Not distant. Yeah. I got them. Thank you for being patient. She replied with a simple heart.
Nothing dramatic.
Just acknowledgement. On Saturday, Malik met his mother at the house. She moved slowly now, leaning on his arm as they walked through the front door together. She touched the walls like she was greeting old friends. It smells like you cleaned, she said. I did, Malik replied. They sat on the porch, the same place he'd sat alone days earlier. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes sharp in the way only mother's eyes could be. You look tired, she said. He didn't argue. I am. She squeezed his hand. Then rest.
The world won't fall apart.
For once, Malik believed her. As the sun dipped low, Malik watched shadows stretch across the yard. The house wasn't fixed. His life wasn't either. But there was a quiet shift he couldn't ignore. He no longer felt like he had to prove he belonged everywhere he stood.
Not to strangers.
Not to systems. Not even to himself. The small win wasn't recognition. It wasn't authority. It wasn't being seen as powerful. It was choosing to see himself as enough, even on days when he felt worn down. As Malik locked up that evening, he paused on the porch and looked back at the house one last time. Not with pressure. Not with guilt.
Just intention.
Sometimes progress doesn't look like a breakthrough. Sometimes it looks like staying.
Like breathing.
Like letting the weight you've carried for years finally rest on the ground. And if you've ever stood somewhere you knew was yours and still felt like you had to explain yourself, maybe you know what that kind of relief feels like too. Maybe your quiet resolution hasn't arrived yet. But it will start the same way. With one small moment where you decide you don't have to carry everything alone.